I've been given a title, The National Parks and the Role of Agriculture in Relation to Their Landscape. And I'm not going to give you any pictures, so you'll have to listen to what I say. No cheating on behind me. I'm going to give you my views of my relationship working in some of the really special landscapes of England, working with the farming community and what I saw as my relationship with that farming community. So, let's get the tricky bit out of the way. I was actually asked to explore the role of agriculture in our national parks. And I think a gentleman said something earlier, which I repeat here. To answer that, it's very simple. It is the practice of cultivating the soil for growing crops and the rearing of animals to provide food, wool and other products. That is their role. Thank you for listening to me. We can now... But it is a serious point, and as a questioner made it earlier. It's important to remember that our farmers are in the business to follow the art and science of agriculture. They're not landscape architects. They're not park keepers. They don't want to be. They are social creatures. So they do generally like the communities. I'm a bit worried about my neighbour. He doesn't like the present community. And they do know their land. Their ancestors did create the landscapes that we love. But their motive was to survive. It was not to build a landscape, it was to survive. Until recently, the landscape probably determined the farming practice. And actually that's not really true today, and I think that's the sort of things that we need to explore. Get the promotional bit out of the way. We have, I won't do me after dinner things, getting to name them. We have 15 national parks in the UK, provided you accept that the Broads is a national park, and there's a talk in itself. Most really are on marginal, low-value land, in farming sense anyway. The majority are in uplands. There are exceptions: Broads, South Downs, New Forest. Interestingly, they're the newer national parks. If you set aside the Broads, they're really very, they have lots of similarities. They also have lots of differences. The Broads are unique. They seem to be a lot wetter than even the Lake District. I actually only know two parks well, and they're the two I'm going to talk about. I'm going to explore the role of agriculture in delivering the landscapes that make the South Downs and the Lake District iconic. I spent my life looking after landscapes I'm told are iconic for the nation, for the public. And the trouble is, there's a fundamental problem with that role. I don't know what the public want. The public don't say really what they want. So I can't say to a farmer, give me this, because I don't know that is what the public want. On the Downs, people walk the ridge, they look out over the national park. They're not actually looking at the national park, they're looking at the Weald outside the national park, or they're looking out to sea. So is the national park merely a viewpoint, or is it something else? That didn't go down well when I was working in Sussex. Hence, I moved up to the lakes. Yeah. In the Lake District, most people only see the settlements and the land either side of it along the A591. They travel Kendal, Ambleside, Hawkshead, Keswick, and explore from the car parks there. They do not look at my national park. They do not see the bulk of the national park. Even on the busiest bank holiday, I can go to absolute tranquility and isolation and not see anyone. Actually, I spend most of my working life like that. Many people who come to the Lake District don't even know how many lakes there are. There's one of our after-dinner ones as well. Do you know how many lakes there are?
No idea.
Any guess?
9.
well now. This is interesting. There's one. Yes, defined lake. There's only one lake in the Lake District, Bassenthwaite Lake. Everything else is a mere or a water or a tarn. But you're right, there are 200 bodies, round numbers, 200 bodies of water in the Lake District. There are 16 principal lakes. They actually want Beatrix Potter, cream tea, bit of Cumberland Ale, and then see if you can get up Helvellyn. Right, joking apart, there are some people who do tell us what they see. 1902, Rudyard Kipling, he published his poem Sussex, and he spoke of those blunt, bow-headed, whale-backed downs. And you will have a picture of those in your mind's eye, not least because Adrian showed you a wartime picture of the Sussex Downs at the Seven Sisters. Samuel Johnson, he travelled to Brighton and he saw those same downs. What he wrote is, the landscape is so desolate that if a man had a mind to hang himself in desperation, he would be hard put to find a tree to fasten the rope to. And both views are correct, of course. Let me do the same joke for the Lake District. The Lake District. 1835, William Wordsworth was certain that this landscape was a sort of national property in which every man has a right and an interest, who has an eye to perceive and a heart to enjoy. And what was that landscape he was looking at? A fellow Lakeland poet, Robert Southey, he describes the area in 1807, so about the same time, as tracts of horrible barrenness, of terrific precipices, rocks rioting upon rocks, and mountains tossed together in chaotic confusion. Daniel Defoe, Robin Crusoe, he entered Westmoreland in 1726. He saw, when he was looking at agricultural land, he saw a country eminent only for being the wildest, most barren and frightful of any that I have passed over in England. And he was describing Grasmere and Dove Cottage. I'm in the fashion business. People's perceptions change, and yet I'm expected to talk to those people who are managing land and give them clear guidance about what the public are going to pay as being a public good. Horrible barrenness, desolateness, you name it. So, what is the role of agriculture in relation to the landscapes in our national parks? Following the publication of the Scott Report, let's go get our Scott reports in 1942, the government appointed John Dower to investigate the feasibility of creating national parks in England and Wales. In his 1945 report, Dower wrote of national parks as extensive areas of beautiful and relatively wild country in which the characteristic natural beauty is strictly preserved. And he said that access will be provided for along with wildlife and heritage protection and safeguards for farming. It was his view that the landscapes were in safe hands because they were farmed. Do you still hold that view? And that supports some of the things Adrian was saying earlier on about the thought process that was going on during those years. Now, let me talk about the two areas I know reasonably well. And in doing that, let us note the South Downs and the Lake District are actually quite different. In my mind, the South Downs are more akin to our lowland areas, notwithstanding the Great Downs. Today, it is an area dominated by arable, though in the past, livestock was more important. Agriculture has been the main driver of landscape change on the Downs. The Lake District is an upland landscape with significant areas of common and marginal land. There is mixed farming, but it's predominantly a livestock area. Early farming did change the landscape, and by early farming I mean medieval, but the needs of industry caused the greatest changes to landscape, though quite often those industries were linked to wool. So first the Downs. During the 1820s, William Cobbett wrote in his Rural Rides in Sussex, one passage in particular, quite instructive. I like to look at the windy side of a great down with 2 or 3 immense flocks of sheep on it, belonging to different farms, and to see lower down the foals in the fields ready to receive them at night. The sheep principally manure the land. This is done by folding, and to fold you must have a flock. Every farm has its portion of down, its arable and its meadow. He describes a long-standing farming practice that moved fertility from the downs to the lowlands, and it gave us the flower-rich grasslands of the South Downs, which we all say are superb. And he describes a practice long gone. When and why did our farmers change the management of the downs? Now, I can't give you an authoritative view, because most of my evidence is anecdotal, and it's gleaned from many a session in the wonderful Sussex pubs. Much of my research is done in pubs. Nigel Walford, though, Kingston University, does supply hard evidence. In his paper, Reconstructing the Agricultural Landscape of the South Downs, England, an examination of the 1940 and 1941 World War II plough-up campaigns, now there's a bit of a hint in the title, we learned that our farmers were told to change their way of working. There's also material available from the National Trust, it's on their website, about the effects of the war on the Devil's Dyke, just outside Brighton, and it's the same information. The instruction was to plough up the centuries-old chalk grassland and plant arable crops in order to feed the nation. Nice, simple instruction. Why had that not happened before? Because chalk and flint soils cover the downs, and you cannot plough them with horses. Didn't have the strength. One of our speakers earlier talked about suddenly a tractor can give you a 700-fold power. That's the impact. So it was not until the mechanisation of the war years that the farmers had the means to deep plough. So you had to stay as grazing. Walford tells us that in the 19th century, the South Downs were sheep and cereals. Sheep on the top, cereals on the grounds. Moved the fertilisation from the tops to the cereals. In the early 20th century, before the war, there was some changes. Sheep products became cheaper to import, so the value of the wool and other products was going down. And also, we were learning how to make artificial fertilisers. And that's been alluded to this morning as well. However, let's be fair here. During World War II, the plough only took 6% of the downs between Beachy Head and the Hampshire border. I put that in because it shows that Dower actually would not have seen a significant change when he was doing his work for the future of that landscape, because it would not look significant. Immediately after the war, there was demand for self-sufficiency. Our farmers now had the means and the incentives to intensify their production systems, and most estates and farms on the Sussex Downs made a change. Now, but not all. When I was a Sussex Downs officer, we did plot the whereabouts of the iconic downland flora and fauna. You can't plough the Scarp face, so it's not a surprise that that's the richest area. But some farmers, farming families really, on the Downs, truly believe that the old methods, not in the purest sense of it, but some remnants of the old methods, are actually the most cost-effective way of managing the land. And the mapping of biodiversity does actually show surprising islands of very rich lands, and those are in the very capable hands of these groups of farmers. South Downs are really like a uniform green and gold, very quiet and tranquil now, whereas there used to be a blaze of colour and a mass of movement. Lots of animals, lots of changed. Farmers changed that landscape in a very, very short time. Can be done. You give an instruction, it can be done. If you want to recreate the landscape of memories, then you have to have the dedication of those same farmers. They could put it back. Recent initiative on the South Downs, because they don't manage in common, the recent initiative in the South Downs is development of farm clusters, where farmers, other businesses, other partners choose to work together, and it's a form of common working. They do things so that you can get things more from the whole than you can from the individuals. And that is beginning to have some environmental benefits. So there are mechanisms for talking to groups to make quite big impact if you so chose. Now, the hills, which is really where I'm from. Sheep farming has been a way of life in the Lake District for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, with mountainous terrain and heavy rain, there isn't actually much else you can do. So the Norse Invaders, they came in the 10th century. They gave us our Herdwick sheep. Though not the ones you see today. The ones you see today were created by Beatrix Potter, who was trying to bring back a traditional breed. We don't actually know what the Herdwicks look like. And indeed, as I said to some people I was having dinner with last night, Herdwick actually only means sheep farm, so we don't even know what the Norse called their sheep. We don't know what the breed is called. But the continuity of farming in the Lake District from that very early medieval period right the way through to the present day is one of the factors that contributed to the inscription of the National Park as a World Heritage Site. Key elements of the farming system include the form of land tenure and a distinctive local shepherding culture. Its communal stock management and communal breeding practices. A Lake District farmer from 500 years ago would recognise many of the practices that go on today, and more importantly, would be able to speak to our farmers, because the business jargon on the farmland is very much as the Norse used. Same words. The Lake District is a landscape that has evolved through centuries of gradual construction and repair by individual farmers and is an ancient countryside. Wool production has always been important, until recently. Cattle were dominant in the early medieval period. Sheep replaced cattle from about 1400 onwards. Medieval landscape, the Lake District had in-by land in the valley bottom, common grazing on the open fell, and that common grazing is important. Many of these commons survive today. Some 60% of the Lake District's farmland is still common, and it's medieval common. A wall known as the ringgarth separates the common grazing land from other farmland. Smaller in-proof fields inside, they're called the intakes. They developed on the upslopes. Originally, within that walled area, strip farming in common on rotation. By the end of the 18th century, the small-scale farming can be based on grazing stock on the open fell, and then the strip farming being replaced by cultivation of oats, barley, vegetables in the valley bottoms, and you started to have walls to keep the animals off your crops. Today, the most common Lakeland farming system is just hill sheep. The improved areas of grassland found in the valley bottom and the gentler valley sides are where the flocks now gather, and that's for lambing and for mating. During the summer, that's our hay, more likely to be silage or haylage. Later, they're grazed by cattle. Nowadays, generally beef, but up until 2001, it was actually a very high dairy area. Foot and mouth destroyed that. Ploughing is rare. It does happen. There still are a few root crops grown, but not much. But what's important is, if you stand on the hill and look into the valley, you can see the Norse landscape. The ringgarth is present, most dominant in Wasdale, in Langdale, but it's in every valley. You can see the lowland parish and enclosure walls. They still exist. They're still used for what they were there for. Changes are slow when you manage in common. But there are changes and there are problems. I don't know of any hill farm that is profitable. I don't know why anyone would be a hill farmer. I really don't. Newcastle University drew up an assessment in 2013. And they say the trends, and this is for the Lake District, the trends are towards fewer and larger hill farms. I think someone else alluded to that earlier on. An associated increase in small, non-commercial hobby farming. Farm holdings are getting bigger and the farming population is shrinking. Livestock populations in the park have declined. Sheep gone down by 30% since 2000. Woodland stayed about the same, about 3% of the national park, farm woodland. These trends reflect both, of course, foot-and-mouth disaster and the wiping out of our flocks have just not come back, but also the changes in policy which previously encouraged livestock numbers to ones that now emphasise environmental management, and that's what we've been talking about this morning. But this is the important point. Farmers are no longer choosing to exercise common grazing rights as their farming practices shift to systems that require lower labour input. They are just beginning to abandon something they've been practicing for over 1,000 years. They're losing heart. They're selling out. No money. Need for, the income from the farmers that I know, their income is grants or it's tourism. They farm because they're farmers. They live by the state or by the tourist. The cultural landscape I love is slowly dying, partly led by our wish to have environmental improvements on the land in a bizarre sort of way. And Denver needs to think about that in their 25-year plan. Quickly, how much time have I got? Quickly on the future. The English, I've been talking as me, usually around in circles, of course. But the English National Park authorities have released their vision for post-Brexit farming in the national parks. That was published 2017. They call for our farmers, I'll read that so I don't get it wrong. They will call for our farmers to become environmental managers, delivering a wide range of public benefits. Sounds familiar. They want to ensure that farming in our national parks supports jobs and growth in the broader rural economy. The national park authorities want a system that rewards farmers for the environmental cultural products that farming can provide, engages and empowers the farming community in design and delivery of those schemes, steers the farming sector into a more sustainable direction, not defined, provides a greatly enhanced range of public benefits from our national parks, and integrates environment, economy, community to demonstrate the integrated delivery that the government wants. All what you'd expect them to say. And they're lucky, aren't the national parks, because that's exactly what DEFRA, their main funder, also wants. No coincidence. And I won't go into the 25-year plan, that's been talked about. Same sort of things. Well, let me finish with this little bit then. And this is talking, having spent times in pubs, but with farmers. Farmers do follow incentives. If you give them the right incentive, they will do it. It is possible to engineer changes to farming practice. The EU has done that quite successfully. What is hard to predict is the landscape you will then get. And I say, again, look at what the EU actually gave us. And I remind you of the Newcastle University's findings. Once you lose the farming vocation, you lose the passion that gave us the landscapes we love. And it's that we're losing and in danger of losing forever if we're not careful. In the uplands, cattle and sheep are almost the only way to get high quality food. So that's the only way you can farm it. But the public also needs to understand that that very system that we have now delivers a wide range of other benefits. Irrespective of all these new whizzo words that we have to do, we're already getting those benefits. And that needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be paid for. The upland farmers deliver drinking water. They mitigate floods. They fix and store carbon. They maintain biological diversity. They keep the hilltops open and easy to walk on. They sustain that pattern of landscape which so many people do delight. We need to rebuild the management in common. That's what's breaking down. And we need to value the traditional structures that frame our landscapes. For example, the walls, the barns no longer fit for farming practice. And we need to pay for them. Therefore, I do welcome the new historic building restoration grant countryside stewardship scheme launched last month, albeit as a pilot. Fortunately, it's in my Lake District. On the downs, our farmers could recreate Kipling's Whaleback Downs, but at what cost? Changing an arable economy back to a pastoral one is a major task. The traditional Sussex sheep and cattle are beautiful to behold. They're gorgeous, all half-size. Our farmers could bring back the herb-rich meadows, but why should they? The downs are so very close to large urban areas, and livestock and dogs is not a good farming model. And who makes money from sheep? In any case, I think this is my last point, and important. The Downs became an area of outstanding natural beauty in the 1960s and a national park in 2011, well after the big change I lament. Millions of people enjoy the Downs every year as they are. They like the present landscape, so why change it? So maybe our farming community is doing the right thing. We don't know what the population wants from our national parks, and we do not know how much they're willing to pay to get it. The farming community will farm if it's profitable. They want to, and I remind you, cultivate the soil for growing crops, and the rearing of animals provide food, wool, other products. They will do environmental things as well as farming, but they will not do them instead of farming. They see that as someone else's job. And that is why we need active landscape management professionals. Thank you for listening to me.
Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. Now, I'm going to allow us to ease a little bit into lunchtime. So, shall we just have 15 minutes then of questions and a little time for comment as well now. So questions of fact, first of all, from Paul.